Tonight, what we know of the Edmund Fitzgerald's final trip. Yesterday, we told you about the weather conditions the Edmund Fitzgerald faced on her last voyage. Today, TV6's Dan Greneville joins us to review the final hours before the famous wreck. Dan?
Thank you, Brady. Sometime after 7:10 in the evening on November 10th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald and her 29-man crew would disappear off the radar screen of the Arthur M. Anderson and sail into infamy. Well, there's a lot we still don't know. We can trace some key moments in the final hours that heralded the end for the Fitzgerald. As the Edmund Fitzgerald and Arthur M. Anderson made their way across Lake Superior on November 10th, 50 years ago, they were met with steadily worsening weather conditions. Both ships were granted some measure of protection from the North Shore during the morning and early afternoon hours. That protection would have to be abandoned as the ships changed course to reach the Soo Locks.
But eventually they needed to make the turn. As they're closing in on an area northeast Lake Superior, Slate Islands are kind of up in that corner. They decide to make the turn. Now they have to make their way down to Whitefish Bay.
Some may question Captain Ernest McSorley's decision in those final hours. But maritime historian Frederick Stonehouse says McSorley's reputation was excellent. He says evidence has never indicated negligence on McSorley's part. However, like all captains, Stonehouse says there was an expectation of meeting deadlines.
Was it anything that I would view as unusual, pressure, or it wasn't? It was the life of a captain. You've got to deliver.
Tracking southeast through open waters, waves continued to build.
The storm would break in its full while they were getting closer to the area of Caribou Shoal.
The rocky shoal extends to the north off Caribou Island. It was later found that Caribou Shoal was a little bit larger and longer than indicated on the charts at the Fitzgerald's disposal.
And during the height of the gale, height of the storm, the Fitzgerald, in the eyes of the captain of the Anderson, Bernie Cooper, went too close to the island, went too close to the shoal.
At 3:30 in the afternoon, Captain McSorley radioed the Anderson to communicate that the Fitzgerald had sustained damage. A fence rail was down, 2 vents were lost or damaged, and the ship had developed a list.
A list indicates that water is entering one side of the vessel, not the other. That listing then causes that ship to lean in that direction.
The Fitzgerald had 2 pumps going to combat the list, though it is unclear which spaces on the ship were being pumped. Sometime later, both of the Fitzgerald's radars were lost.
There was never any explanation to what had particularly happened to them, other than they didn't work and Anderson was just keeping an eye on her.
At 7:10 in the evening, the Anderson would make radio contact with the Fitzgerald for the final time.
He had asked him how he was coming along with his problem. And Captain McSorley said, "We're holding our own." And those are the last words ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald.
There is much speculation as to what extent the Fitzgerald's crew was aware of the gravity of the situation.
I don't think the crew knew what was going on at all. I think that Captain McSorley probably knew exactly what his options were. They were slim and none. They weren't even slim, they were none. Whatever happened to Fitzgerald was happening right now. It was not going to make Whitefish Point. He knew the Coast Guard had nothing to offer him in terms of rescue. He knew that his lifeboats were useless to use in weather conditions like that.
There is no evidence that there was time to even consider use of the lifeboats or rafts. Had these vessels been reached, there would have been no guarantee of survival.
And sailors on the Great Lakes don't die generally by drowning. They freeze to death. So you're now in November on Lake Superior in an open lifeboat. How long do you live? Not long.
It would be Captain Cooper of the Anderson who first alerted the Coast Guard to the potential loss of the Fitzgerald.
They get within about 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Point, roughly 7:10 p.m. A snow squall comes through. The crew up in the pilot house of the Arthur M. Anderson, they can't really see anything for a few minutes, and then that squall clears.
Lynn says despite the clearing, the Anderson would not regain sight of the Fitzgerald.
But suddenly now they're having trouble seeing the lights of the Fitzgerald, which would have been up ahead of them. Now they can't see them quite as well, and then they also notice that they can't see it on their radar either.
The Coast Guard would launch search efforts after Captain Cooper called for a second time at 8:25 in the evening. A search plane would arrive at the scene at 10:53 at night, followed by a helicopter at 1 a.m. It would not be until 12:45 in the afternoon on November 11th that the Coast Guard arrived with a tugboat. The Anderson was also asked to leave shelter and assist in the rescue efforts.
Cooper brought all of his men together, sat them down and said, here's the problem, here's what I want to do, what do you guys think? And to a man, they all said, let's go. So the crew had enough courage to go back out in those seas in an effort to do some good for Fitzgerald. By that point, of course, she was gone.
It would be 4 days later, on November 14th, that the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was detected through magnetic anomaly by a U.S. Navy aircraft. In the days, months, and years following, researchers and historians would continue to grapple with theories about what led to the loss. Tomorrow, I'll return to break those down. And don't forget, on Monday's 50th anniversary, we'll have a full special on the Fitzgerald available only on TV6+. Brady?